Hey everybody, it's Jason Blah here. Now that my two obligatory informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community, and some of my subscribers have awared me of the fact that Jeff Cavalier, aka Athlean-X, some people have started jokingly calling Brolean-X, made a video about the perfect tricep workout. And they're like, Jason, he's doing presses off pins, which you say are actually dangerous and beat your joints up. What do you have to say about that? That's a good question. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. All right, so I'm going to state up front, the video wasn't actually completely terrible. This is a case to where Jeff, being an educated, smart guy who does have a lot of coaching experience, actually did say a lot of things that I agree with. So I don't want people to think that I'm going to be bashing Jeff completely for this video. There are going to be some points that, from a programming perspective, and also with this idea of training athletes, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But where I want to give credit is that he pointed out that he does talk a lot about the importance of the long head of the tricep, and he felt like the long head of the tricep did need some extra discussion in this video because it does have a different function from the other heads of the tricep. And I couldn't agree more. It's something I've said for many, many years, and I think you see a lot of people out there who understand basic anatomy point that out. Oftentimes it is the long head, this head back here, that gets neglected in a lot of people's training, including even bodybuilders who are trying to develop all those heads, which is not really my target audience. And in theory, it shouldn't be his because he talks about athletes, but he does promote a lot of bodybuilding fluff and pump. But the point is, he talked about the three heads of the tricep, the lateral head, the medial head, the long head, their functions, and he's right. And I will absolutely agree with him that for a lot of guys, the long head does get neglected. And that, oftentimes that's the area. If you have a weak point in the tricep, if you're doing enough pressing, odds are the long head, 90% of the time, is where your weakness is going to be. So because of that, giving it a little bit of extra attention is generally warranted if triceps are a problem area for you. The problem we come to, though, is that I felt like he really didn't give it a lot of attention. Like, he did so much stuff talking about continual tension and bands and everything else that I feel like he lost sight of the long head focus, and he didn't focus upon the big exercises that can build the long head. Now, I'll be the first to say that if you are going to try to do a smaller exercise of some type, right, you're not going to do a big heavy press or a dip, it does need to be focused on the long head, right? Because most of your big movements that we think of as tricep builders do tend to leave that head of the tricep neglected because, again, they don't have that motion involved and stuff dealing with moving the scapula. But the problem is that it seems like he fell right into that same niche of skipping the big exercises that do that. Namely, here's what they are: the standing overhead press and the weighted pull-up. Now, aren't those exercises that Jeff actually promotes a lot of? They actually are. So it's kind of, I'm a little shocked, to be fair, that a guy who actually promotes those exercises does his entire videos discussing those exercises, and I will give credit for that. I will give props for that. If anything, you want to see me give some mad respect to Jeff from recommending exercises, how about all his discussion about doing pull-ups injury-free, how to avoid problems while doing pull-ups, telling people pull-ups are important, chin-ups are important, and getting strong on them. That's worthy of praise, the fact that he actually promotes that. Same thing with the standing press. Right, he tells you if you want to be an athlete, train like an athlete. That means you do your overhead pressing standing, not seated. Bravo. So, I mean, I will give him much respect for saying that. But when you go look at all the different overhead pressing, which form of overhead pressing in multiple EMG studies hits the long head of the tricep the hardest? The standing barbell press, right? It beats dumbbells, it beats seated, everything. It hammers the triceps, and particularly the long head, harder than any other form of overhead pressing. If we're going to talk about complete tricep development, where was the overhead pressing? Where was it? Hell, if we're going to talk about athletes, how many athletes use the push press to bring up their triceps? I mean, why wasn't that in the list? Why are we jumping to cables and bands and stuff with no push pressing? I don't get it. I mean, if anything, if you wanted to be honest, if someone is doing tons of chest pressing, whether it's a closed grip bench press or a weighted dip or any of that, and they're putting a massive amount of effort into developing those lifts, odds are the long head is what's lagging. Well, why don't you have them put a tremendous focus into getting their overhead press up? Get your overhead press to 200 plus pounds, hopefully even for reps. Get your weighted dead hang pull-ups really strong. Do those things and then come back and tell me that you have a lagging long head of the tricep if you're doing enough overall tricep volume. Probably not. That might actually fix the problem without resorting to an isolation movement. And, if all else fails, all right, fine, some smaller movements definitely have their place. Because for some people, you might find yourself in that situation in spite of that. And I would agree there is a time and place for those things for weak point training, but they shouldn't be your automatic go-to. Those should be your automatic go-tos. If you're worried about the long head of your tricep not developing, get brutally strong on standing barbell presses or standing overhead presses of any type. Get brutally strong on your weighted pull-up and go all the way down and get a stretch at the bottom, which puts that stretch reflex on the long head of the tricep. All right? And yes, a pull-up does recruit the tricep more than a chin-up does. Granted, it's a secondary exercise for it, but it plays a very, very pivotal role in the first few inches out of the bottom of a pull-up, particularly if you're going all the way down. You're locking your elbows. You're going all the way down. Yeah, it does get recruited pretty heavily there. But let's go over to the issue with the first couple of exercises. The first two exercises he recommended, I'm like, those are fantastic lifts. Those are fantastic exercises. Weighted dip and the closed grip bench press, yeah, those will put a hell of a lot of meat on your tricep, in addition to being just all-around good upper body exercises. Those are exercises that will put a lot of muscle on your triceps, but they also will build a lot of other muscle in your upper body. Those are almost core or essential exercises. You need to be doing one of those two, right? You need to be either doing a closed grip bench press or a weighted dip, or both. Hey, both isn't bad, but I do think that you need to build a tremendous base on one of those two lifts, and he's got both of them in there. The problem I had with it, though, is that they're doing it off the pins, and I've got two problems with that. Number one, he was talking about, well, it allows you to overload the top and it doesn't get work that much at the bottom. But the tricep does get a deeper stretch at the bottom if you go touch your chest on it. So if we're going to talk about complete range of motion, what do we know based upon research? Research generally indicates that if you increase weight by reducing range of motion, you actually oftentimes get less hypertrophy. There's less hypertrophic potential there. So that's not a good thing. That's not desirable. And that's based upon the science. If he's going to talk about science, then he needs to realize that. He does so much other full range of motion stuff and talks about the importance of getting all this range of motion on these different muscles, like the pectorals, for example. But then when it comes to triceps, right off the bat, the first exercise, he's having you reduce range of motion, and you're losing some potential muscle fiber stimulation. And I don't think that's a good thing. We need to be looking at what's the heaviest weight you can lift through an effective range of motion. You want the longest effective range of motion possible with the heaviest weight you can handle for the target reps. That's how you stimulate maximum growth. Cutting range of motion to add weight doesn't do it. Number two, hitting the pins. What does every power lifter out there know? Pin presses are a no-no. They need to be used very sparingly. Why? It destroys your joints. It beats up your elbows. It beats up your wrists. We know that. There's a reason power lifters who did do partials because of equipped lifting, right, and benching with shirts, they realized decades ago that it destroys your joints to be doing heavy pin presses and hit the pins on every rep. What did they do to improvise? They came up with the board press and the carpet press, the board press being the most popular way to deal with it. All right, board presses will work wonders for that. Board presses will work wonders for that. And you have a soft touch, then you don't beat the joints up as bad. So as someone as a physical therapist, I'm surprised he hasn't looked into what powerlifters have found with their own injuries and inflammation and that stuff over the years and realized that pin presses are a no-no. Again, his guys might not be very strong. The people he's recommending to do this, I'm questioning their strength base if they're not getting a lot of pain from doing this. These aren't guys who are doing rep work with 300 plus on these pin presses day in and day out. Clearly, or he would already know this is a problem once you get strong. You'll get hurt. Maybe if you're weaker, and a lot of the guys that he's talking to are weaker, so I get that. But that's kind of my big issue there. The other thing is that we jump over to all these different isolation movements, and some of it I think was just fluffy-wuffy. It really was. I mean, if you want to just build the lateral and the medial head, by all means, just do more closed grip bench pressing. Hell, do another set of closed grip bench press. Don't do some fluffy shit. Do some more weighted dips. We need to be focusing on the long head. If you're going to do these small exercises, that's probably what's lagging. Put your extra efforts there. And I feel like every single one of these exercises, he kept going back to wanting to get all this contracted position work. And it's almost like he's working off that whole positions of flexion philosophy. But here's the thing. You're getting that on the lockout on that closed grip bench. Aren't you getting damn near maximum contraction work when you're doing these partials on a closed grip bench press with a heavier weight? Come on. You're already getting that. Why are you needing to add that back in? Focus on the long head. You'll need to be thinking of, hey, can I get this position where I can squeeze the most? Or when he does pick a really, really effective exercise for the long head, where he had the dumbbells and they're doing, again, you're laying down and you're getting that shoulder movement involved. You're getting, again, that rotation of the shoulder, an extension of the shoulder happening. You're putting that stretch on the long head. That's what you want. But then what's he doing? He's forcing himself to use a lighter weight on the dumbbells by putting those bands on so that he can get the contraction. Well, that's reducing the load under the stretch part, because you're able to do maybe a little more at the lockout because of the bands, but you're probably using a lighter dumbbell. So you're sacrificing the stretch position, which is probably the one thing you're missing in this little program he wrote. You're missing that. It's being neglected, and so what is he going to do? He'll take the one best exercise he possibly has for that, one that can really, really effectively target that area, and then he reduces the load in that area by adding bands so that it's harder at the contracted position. I don't know. I don't think this just makes a lot of sense from a programming perspective. You want to know what I think is your best approach to build big triceps? Get really strong on the closed grip bench press, full range of motion, really strong on the weighted dips, really strong on the overhead press. Make it a focus if you need to. If the long head of your triceps lagging, do some specialized work in the standing press and or the push press, and then get brutally strong at those full range of motion pull-ups. That will probably fix your problem. And then if the long head is still lagging behind, that's where a laying tricep extension with shoulder extension involved starts to come into play. But you don't need bands for it. I feel like he overcomplicated what should have been a relatively simple solution and a very elegant solution, and a lot of that would have been better for athletes. I mean, truth be told, you have someone you want to make a better athlete who wants to grow their triceps. Do you want to lay around doing some cable work or doing dumbbell work for their triceps, or do you want to get them to do some heavy ass standing presses? You want them to get really strong at their weighted pull-up. I mean, which of those is going to make them a better athlete while putting meat on the same part of their tricep? Right? It's like we've come around over to saying, hey, what's going to make my guys the biggest, strongest, fastest athletes and blow their triceps up as big as possible at the same time, versus just what's going to give them the biggest triceps with no concern for the other thing. The end results are going to be very different. In one of those cases, you're going to have better performance to go with the big triceps. And in the other one, you're only concerned with the triceps. I'm sorry, I don't get it. It doesn't make a lot of sense for a guy who always says things like, train like an athlete. Because that's not training like an athlete at that point. Just my opinion on it, though. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.